Hi and welcome. I am going to explain an article that I wrote called The Immersion Approach. So if you go to my companion website, which is now called the Tibetan Academy, the ManjuTib Tibetan Academy, you can go to this second link that's there right now. The site may have evolved again by the time you see this video. I periodically make upgrades, but right now it looks like this. So the immersion approach. And this is based on the materials provided by a school called Esukhia or Nangten Sishukang. They have a Tibetan immersion approach to learning Tibetan as a second language. And they have developed a lot of really wonderful materials. And I've given just an overview of how you can navigate the materials. I found finally the how to use this book section in their beginning reader, and I found it very useful. So we could just start by having a look at that page. You will see that once you get to the book, you have this navigation at the top left for there's about 8 chapters in the book of units of lessons, and then there is this section called How to Use This Book, and then Design Principles, and then the credits and copyright. So we'll walk through those a little bit right now. So the How to Use This Book section starts with just the technical requirements. So what do you need to actually be able to navigate the book? So you need a large screen, preferably a tablet or a laptop screen or a monitor. You can use Google Chrome as your browser. That will give you the best experience. Make sure that you have Tibetan fonts installed. And then what you'll discover is that in the book itself, there is no English. There are only symbols. So you will see various symbols like for listening, headphones for listening, a person speaking for when you have to speak, uh, a book for when you need to read out loud, which is really the best practice. Writing a little pen, a pencil writing on a piece of paper for when you need to do a written exercise. And I'll show you now in this gray box, for example, if you write the word writing, as in the example here, the box will turn yellow when you get the correct answer. So in the Tibetan, you will see that sometimes you need to add a tek or a dot to end a syllable, and sometimes you will need to add a she to end a phrase. But in general, it doesn't force you to use either the tek or the she, but as you get further along in the book, it may do that. Then you'll notice that there are some places that have this sort of blurry text, and when you hover over it with your cursor, it will reveal the answer. So you can test yourself. You can guess the answer first, and then you can hover over it to test to see whether you got the right answer. So that's quite useful. You'll notice back on my web page explaining the whole process, I made a small list at the end, in one of the ending sections about errata. So there are a few errors that creep up in the book in a few places. So I made some notes about the ones that I came across. If you find more, please just add them in the comments to this video and I'll update that list. Then, as usual, I agree, dialogues are the most important things to learn as you're learning any language. So this is the symbol for having a dialogue, two people. And then they also have exercises where they have this yellow letter ka with the listening. So it's a read along. It's a little bit like karaoke. You can adjust the speed of the people who are reading the dialogue and you can read along with it. The words will highlight as it goes through as you hear each word. Then this little finger pointing is for when you need to make a choice. So if an answer is right, it will show as a little green check mark. And if the answer is wrong, it will show as the red X. Or I suppose the background is green, the check mark is white. And here the check marks, the X mark is red and the background is gray. And then down here, you get another example of the blurred text. So when you see the number 1 and then number 2, and when you hover over the number that's blurred, you will reveal the matching answer. So that's quite useful. The next symbol is the acting symbol. So you can act out things, such as like a yak, for example. And then some more, this is another symbol that's similar to the dialogue. It is a dialogue, but this is meant to be done with two people. But you have a workaround. If you are by yourself for whatever reason, either you are shy or you just don't have time to work with your teacher right now. Ideally, you have a tutor who is helping you and who is correcting your pronunciation and your sentences. That's really the best way forward. practicing as often as you can to actually make sentences with someone and communicate. So what I do if I am alone when I'm doing the pair work exercise is I open the second dialogue in a new window. So you just hold the control key before clicking on the second line of dialogue, and that will open it in a new tab. And then you can drag the tab beside the other tab and see the two dialogues side by side, and then go back and forth using that strategy. Then you have the color coding pronunciation. So what they've done is that on the left, you have the letters in yellow and green, which are the letters that are not aspirated or not breathy. And then on the right, you have the letters that are aspirated. The red and the blue are aspirated, so meaning they have more breathiness sound to them. So the example they give is the ah, not breathy, versus the ha, which is said with the breath, so aspirated. And then the other difference is that the ones on top, the yellow and the red, are said with a higher tone, and then the ones on the bottom with the green and the blue are a lower tone. So the example that shows here is the ah versus the ah. And so you can hear the difference. As I said, there's no English in the book, so they use images such as the little candle images here. So this shows the difference between unaspirated, no big puff of air coming out of the mouth, versus aspirated, the breathy one where there is more air coming out of the mouth that makes the candle flame move. So in general, this is very helpful. As you go through the book, you will have clues as to what you are supposed to understand and know going forward about the words and the sentences. Then we have some notes about verbs. You have verbs that relate to space or the spectrum of space. So as you've maybe seen in Franziska Oertli's book, she talks about self versus other. Here they talk about near verbs, so verbs that originate within you, so you have a close personal association with them. Then there's also this perceived, so you have a personal perspective on it. You have a evidence as a witness, for example, something that you've seen. Then you have this other icon that's like a share icon that means far or impersonal. So for general facts, common knowledge, things like re, yore, those relate to general facts or situations. And then you also have verbs that relate to the spectrum of time, or the sort of the meanings associated with the verbs that have to do with the spectrum of time. So immediate events, things that are happening either in your immediate space or in the immediate moment. And then continuous events that are happening over and over again, and then permanent events, which are static, not changing, like general facts. So then we go down a little bit more, and it talks about the basic rules of their system, which is Tibetan only philosophy, which is certainly much easier when you're living in Dharamsala or in Lhasa or in Chengdu, where you have large Tibetan communities, or even in Toronto, for example, they have many Tibetans. So it's more easy to find yourself in an immersion cultural context. And then but if not, you can try to create that as much as you can for yourself with language partners online, or, if you have a small community and in person, if you can have more regular interactions, that's always ideal. 100% speaking. So as often as possible, you try to shadow the speakers, meaning that you listen to what the audio is saying and you repeat it as closely to their pronunciation as you can. And again, in an ideal world, you will have a tutor who can correct your pronunciation and your sentences as you learn. Uh, then 100% positivity. They have a philosophy which I wholeheartedly support, which is that there's we don't talk about mistakes in language at this level, especially. I mean, we're not trying to be editors or proofreaders. We are just trying to immerse ourselves in new words and new vocabulary. So our goal is really to just get the message across. So our A success means we have communicated our message to the other person, or we have understood their message to us, and vice versa. So that's all it is. It's successful communication or unsuccessful communication. There's no uh, judgment call on whether it's a mistake or not. It's just we just keep trying ways of communicating that are more or less effective. And as we learn more and more Tibetan and become more and more familiar with actual Tibetan structures, those become more natural. And ideally, you start to forget that you even speak English. You just think directly in Tibetan. I've had a few dreams where I'm speaking Tibetan, or I've had an hour-long conversation in my Tibetan, which is still not super fluent, somewhat limited, but definitely better than it ever was before. So, there is good progress happening with these materials and with working with tutors and so on, and lots of self-study with many dialogues. So, this is all about better communicating. Then they also encourage you to find a native speaker, a classmate, even if you have to use yourself as a language partner, okay, that's okay too. Just don't give up, keep going. And then about some notes about note taking, which is also very helpful, whether you use a digital format or a written format, like in a book. Both are good, and maybe doing both is probably beneficial, helps you build better, stronger pathways in your mind. And they'll give you some good suggestions about what sort of things you can write in your notes, vocabulary, journaling, etc., questions, and so on, questions for your teacher, for perhaps. And then we come to the next page where they go into a little bit more detail about the design principles, meaning the teaching principles, the pedagogical principles, and the linguistic principles, so the language-specific principles. So they talk a little bit about their Tibetan-only method, which, as I said, is really great when you live in an environment where there are many native speakers. We are somewhat limited in the West in that extent, but hopefully that will change over time. We will have more second language learners and who can support each other here. And then, as I mentioned, you can use those pair work exercises with a partner. Integrative approach. So this is an important point that, in a sense, because our resources have been rather limited, many people who are studying Tibetan just stick with learning classical Tibetan because that's where a lot of the materials are available. But now that we have the internet and better resources, it's becoming more easy to learn in a more natural way. So you learn Tibetan as a colloquial language, so you can speak to teachers, and then you progressively add more of the classical language as you're able to talk about it with native speakers or advanced speakers of Tibetan. So that's just the more natural way that many communities do. Like if you're studying the Quran, you can study the classical Arabic, but then you can't really talk to anybody about it because people speak in their own dialect. So that's just one example. Or Japanese, same idea. If you want to study Japanese poetry, you know, medieval Japanese poetry, you want to still be able to speak to modern Japanese people about it because they're the people who are most likely to be interested in such a thing. So that's the benefit of actually speaking Tibetan at the same time, modern Tibetan, that is. So text readability, similar to English, where, the word night used to be pronounced knicht, but the spelling has not changed. In Tibetan as well, you will come across words that are spoken a certain way, but still written another way. And here they give you some help by color coding, as we showed with the tone and the aspiration. They also use a big tek to separate words, because normally you just have the tek after every syllable. And sometimes in some of the later texts, they use a double tek as well. And then there is that sort of karaoke style guide as well. And then they also use language frequency to build their vocabulary, which means they're using the most frequently used words uh, to build the earliest things that you're learning. So it's all very useful words right away that you're learning. And also, they made a choice not to use honorifics in this early material uh, batch of vocabulary that you're learning for all the new sentences. So just to simplify things, I think. Then they talk a little bit more in detail about the verbs that we looked at on the other page. So it's a time-based language and not a tense-based language, which is slightly different. I myself, as a beginning/intermediate learner, I don't tend to put a lot of my energy into learning all of the different spellings for the different tenses of things. They do exist for some verbs, but I try to simplify things with my ing, thinking in English about pretty much any form of a verb, just to simplify the way my brain tries to still somewhat translate from English into Tibetan, although I'm getting better at just reading the Tibetan as it stands without having to think in English as an intermediate. So that that's coming a little bit easier. Then we have the just a bit more detail about the spectrum of space. So the examples here are the personal versus the impersonal. So ngepu emchi yin. Why are you saying yin, which is the personal form when you're talking about your son? My son is a doctor, versus the sentence ngepu emchi re, like my son is a doctor, but using the more factual re. So re means just my son is a doctor. It's a fact, simple fact. Versus ngepu emchi yin is more like in English when we say my son is a doctor. So we use our stress to indicate that we're talking about the personal perspective, like he's my son as opposed to someone else's son. And he's a doctor because I paid for his university or something could be the implication, for example, when you're using yin as opposed to re in this context. So that's one easy example to think about. So then it's just a review of the personal icon, the perceived icon, and the impersonal icon. And then we have the spectrum of time. So we have the immediate represented by the little drop with the ripples. And so chadi tapodok, so something that's in my immediate vicinity in time or in space. This tea is hot, meaning this tea that I have in front of me is hot. And versus me tapore, fire is hot, meaning fire is hot in general. Um, Whereas if you said, for example, me tapodok, you might mean something like the fire that's burning in the fireplace next to me right now is hot. That would be the implication if you choose do instead of re in that sentence. So that's just to give you an idea of what's going on in the background there. Then we have the time icons. So immediate, we already just looked at. Then realized is a new one. So I just realized that something is the case. So for example, oh, I just noticed that this pen is red instead of black. That's also a level of perspective that comes in a verb form. And then continuous and permanent are rather self-evident, so those are pretty clear. Then they have some notes about dialect, so the differences between the various branches of Old Tibetan, which have had many dialects that are classed into about 50 languages. And then we have some three major regions. So you have Amdo, you have Kham, and Utsang, which are now various different parts of the Tibetan Autonomous Region and then other Chinese provinces. So we have a variety of these language forms. And for example, the Yutsang dialect tends to have more honorifics. And then we go into the honorific section. So similar to English, we do have honorifics in the sense that, for example, we use more Latin derived words for medical terms. When we're talking to our doctor, for example, that would be an example of honorifics versus just regular language. And so you will find the same thing in Tibetan. So different set of vocabulary that you use with monks and nuns and people who you respect, your elders, and so on. Then writing speech, again, this point of the fact that we do not pronounce things the way they used to be written. So one of the conventions that they use in the beginner book is the black text. So you'll come across some words that are not using the colored versions, but they're in black because they're showing the formal written form of the word as opposed to the way that people actually pronounce it, which would be the color-coded version. So that's also quite interesting. And then the next page at the end here is the credits and copyrights, where they outline their Creative Commons license, which is a non-commercial, no derivatives license, which means that if you decide to make some sort of teaching materials that is based on their materials, then and you are charging money for it, then you would have to do that with a licensing agreement from them. So you would have to contact them in order to find out exactly what their requirements are for, I presume would be a percentage of the profits of whatever you're making from such a derivative, and so on. So that would be the reason to look through the copyright page as well. So let's just go to the hamburger menu at the top left here, and I'll give you some visuals of how the pages look. This is the beginning opening page of the beginning reader. So don't worry too much if you don't know how to read the Tibetan script just yet. You see some of the symbols, and that's all you need at this point. The headings of each section are in gray here. They indicate what the topic will be about. And then the red links go to each page of the lesson, so you can skip. You can find your place again if you need to leave off. This top row of stars will show how far along in all of the units you are. There are 8 stars, one for each unit. So within here, you see, for example, this first lesson, there's no English. There's just the symbol to listen. You can press it and you will hear the instruction to listen. And then when you click on the letter itself, you'll hear the person pronouncing. So you can copy it yourself. You shadow it, ha. And then you go through all this slides progressively will give you more indications. And when they're trying to explain something, they won't write in English. They will give you an image so that it will let you guess at what you're supposed to be understanding. Most things are fairly clear. Then they have some writing instructions showing you how to write out the letters. And if you get your Tibetan keyboard installed, you can test yourself. So when you type the letter, it will give it to you correctly. If you add the tek, it will probably not give you an error. If you add a she, whoops, a she, yeah, see, it won't let you do will it let you do just a she? Yeah, it doesn't like having a she, but just a tek should be fine in some places. You can play around with that. And then, so for example, as you go along, let's just pick another section at random here. I'll see if I can find one of the dialogue pages. But in any case, here's an example of the color coded. So you see the tone of things. It's got the big tek to separate words. You see the she at the end for some. This is the regular tek, and then the big tek, and then the she for ending a phrase. So you get reading practice, you get writing practice. And also on my page here, as I mentioned, you have the errata in case you run into any problems. If I was able to do it, it means it's probably not an error. You're just not getting the answer right just yet. And that's essentially it as far as this book goes. When you get to the end of the book, what you can do is you can come and visit the yak down at the bottom here, and it will bring you to the main Esukhia page. So here, this first button brings you to the textbooks. The second button brings you to storybooks, which might be a bit too challenging still if you're quite a beginner. And then Semo, which are games. So you can try those as well, see how you do with the games. And in any case, the textbooks, this is the first one that you would have completed with those 8 units. Then Sori Mebu is a earlier incarnation of this beginning reader, so it's worth a look. You won't probably learn too much new vocabulary. The color coding is slightly different. It's an interesting challenge just to go through it. Then they have an intro week book that it uses a double tek instead of a big tek to separate the words, and it has more dialogues and activities to try as well. And then the A1 beginner book has new words, new vocabulary, more dialogues, and it also has a number of workbook type exercises, but those If you're really a beginner, it might be a bit too challenging to start with. I would say you can stick with just the words and new vocabulary and sentences and try to learn those the best you can first. And then you can work on the activities as you improve. But it depends on your taste. If you really like doing those kind of activities, then go for it. It's also good practice. You can go ahead and don't be intimidated by them. Just do try to take in as much of the existing sentences and dialogues as you can, because those would be the ones that you can use when you're making your own sentences, and you want to be doing that as quickly as possible to get communicating with people as quickly as possible and as often as possible to get fluent. So these beginner mission book, beginner missions, and passport are a set of, it's essentially sort of a language learning treasure hunt. If you have a Tibetan community that you can try these out with, it's fantastic. It's sort of a checklist of activities that you can try to practice your language skills with people. So those are very nice also to look at. Then there's a version 2 of the beginner book, which is similar to the first two books put together, but it's more dialogues, more questions, which I would say are the main focus for you as a beginner. And then it all has other sections that are relating to, poetry and games and stories, for example. But I tend to leave those for later. I'm focusing as a beginner more on the vocabulary that has to do with asking and answering questions and doing dialogues with people, because that's the real fundamentals before you get to any storybooks and things like that. So, and then the second set, A2, is has the same progression, and then the B1, it only has the first two books, but they also just build on that vocabulary and give you a chance to improve the complexity, or to increase the complexity of the sentences that you're using and learning. And again, you can stick with learning the vocabulary and the new words and sentences. That would be the main focus, at least for the first round. You can always go back and learn more later, but this will be the first pass, I suppose, of learning things for yourself. So I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm really excited for more and more people to be able to interact with these materials and get some use out of them. Build your confidence, get yourself a tutor. There are many, many tutors on italki, on Preply, in language exchange sites where you can just exchange your time with someone, teach them English or some other language that you already speak, and they will converse in Tibetan with you and be able to help you with your pronunciation and so on. So there are tutors who are trained in specifically these materials, and there are also those who use their own materials and other materials. So there's plenty of choice out there depending on your goals. And if you want to have a look at the overview of the goals, you can come back to my main page and look at my objectives and evaluation page, where I have done a little breakdown of, some of the reasons to learn languages, what are some of the, main advantages to learning it, and then also just thinking about your goals. So I think some of the typical goals are, you're just a newbie, you just want to learn the basics, and that's enough. Then heritage speakers, so people who may have grown up even speaking Tibetan with their parents or other people, but they don't have a lot of practice with reading and writing or grammar. And then you have Dharma trekkers, so that would be people who are interested in traveling to Lhasa or to India or to Nepal or to places in the West with more Tibetan people, with like Toronto or New York, for example, or Bloomington, and then conversing with the communities there. So they would use their Tibetan in monasteries or on retreat or on pilgrimages, or it could be absolutely for science things, like maybe you're interested in science and you look at the Emory University materials that they have for teaching science to monks, for example. And that's quite interesting. And then finally, Dharma interpreters. So many people who want to be able to interpret Dharma teachings, Buddhist teachings from Tibetan into their own language, whether it's English or French or Mandarin or any other language, Vietnamese, so on. So I hope you really enjoy the new organization of the website. I think it's evolving more into sort of a book style, I suppose, which don't feel overwhelmed. Take your time, use as much of it as you need, whenever you need. I'm really happy to be able to share all of these resources with you as I'm learning and getting better at the language myself and working with more tutors myself and starting to teach others the beginners stuff and just getting more involved in learning more frequently and with more confidence. So you are welcome here. I really wish you all the best success in your Tibetan studies. And please do share your needs and your interests and your goals and your resources, whatever you have to share with our little community here is very welcome. So thank you so much.